Hi everyone, this is Scott Goins, and I'm giving a little introduction. This is actually for a class I teach at McNeese State University, but maybe somebody else will watch this too. Giving an introduction to the first chapter, which is the first poem, Catullus 1, from Ken Kitchell's A Legamus Transitional Reader. It has a lot of help, so it would be good for high school students or people doing their first advanced class in college. Ken used to teach at LSU and then University of Massachusetts, and he was very good at pedagogy. That was his specialty, although of course he knew his literature too. So it's a good text to use. It's published by Bolchesi Publishers. Bolchesi Carducci. I think they may have switched to just call him Bolchesi. But anyway, you can find it easily on Amazon if you don't have it. Catullus, A Legamus Transitional Reader by Kenneth Kitchell. And so I'm going to kind of go through that. Again, this is for a class, so I don't know if anybody else will watch it, but I was thinking from here on out, since Catullus does have some racy things, and we might have some like homeschool people watching this, I'll try to remember at the beginning of the lecture to make note if anything is kind of beyond PG-13. This poem will be nice and clean. Ken starts out over on, this is page 1 after his introduction, and talks about the dedicatory poem, which is what number 1 is. So in these poems in Latin, you typically thank the person who's financing you. You make some sort of an invocation to the muse. Muse is the goddess of poetic inspiration. That goes all the way back to Homer, that you have authors doing that. And then usually you'll have some, especially at this time, some hints of what your poetic values are, what you're trying to do in this poem. Catullus, as I mentioned in that introductory lecture, he was one of the, what they call the new poets, or the neoteric poets, using the Greek term. And part of what they emphasized was using the Alexandrian poetry model. I won't go into that a lot now, but it tended to be erudite, and so you display your knowledge, and you also focus on smaller topics. It had become popular among these poets to realize that epic was probably a thing of the past. Now, you did have people writing epics, but they were not really admired by these neoteric poets. They basically said, Homer and Hesiod did it best, and it's impossible to redo that, which becomes interesting when Virgil kind of decides, well, I'm going to change that. And he does it pretty successfully, I think. The Alexandrians tended to prefer Hesiod, by the way, because they thought, he takes a finite topic and treats it well. I'm not saying they didn't like Homer, but they used Hesiod more as their model. Okay, so anyway, getting back to more of Ken's book, he then has a little section at the bottom of page 1, keep this grammar in mind, and he urges a review of the participles, which begins over on page 2. Latin loves participles, and so you need to be familiar with those. For those in this class, I have what I jokingly refer to as the Swole Latin Grammar Packet, and there's a page 4 in that packet that has participles, so please read over that if you don't remember them terribly well. The ones that are kind of the easiest to understand or 3 out of 4 of them, the present active participle, perfect passive participle, and future active participle. There's also a future passive participle which kind of does some extra things, so we won't talk about that. Ken wisely left that out in the review. So the present active participle, again, you should look at the Swole Grammar Pack on page 4, or look in some other textbook for some charts, or call it up on Wiki. I'm sure you can find it on Wiki or whatever. But it essentially, you have the present stem and you have third declension endings. Okay. So he gives as an example, Catullus libellum expoliens, Catullus polishing the little book. Okay, libellum is little book. It's a diminutive. He'll talk about that at some point. Perfect passive participle is the one that seems a little odd to us. You translate it usually as having been whatevered, okay? Or just whatevered with an ed, okay? So the example he gives, libellus a Catullo expolitus, the little book or the book having been polished or just polished by Catullus. The a Catullo is what we call an ablative of agent, okay? A or ob, if you have a vowel, you use ob, a or ob, plus a person in the ablative case, okay? And that is formed from the fourth principal part of a verb. I would give you expolio, but I might not remember the parts. So we'll do our old friend porto, portare, portavi, and portatum. So the fourth principal part, portatum. That declines like first and second declension. Okay, and finally, this one's going to really sound awkward to us, but you have the future active participle. That one is formed by sticking a UR in front of the ending to a perfect passive participle. So you take a perfect passive participle, put a UR in front of the ending, okay? And so then you translate it as about to whatever, okay? Again, we would hardly ever use such a form in English. But in Latin, they like participles a lot, okay? So Catullus, Catullus libellum expoliturus, Catullus about to polish the book, or the little book, okay? All right. So he has exercise A. I'll just do like 2 or 3 of those so you can get a running start on those. He's just asking you to practice them a little bit. So number 1 would, donans is a present active participle, so you translate it as the man giving the book. Okay. And donans is nominative. Again, just a reminder, ideally you need to be really, really careful with the endings so that you can match the participle or adjective, say, with the noun that it goes with, and know what case you're in. Sometimes it's common sense, but it can be very tricky. And so, always go back periodically and review your declensions, especially the first 3 declensions. I think you can get by a little bit without knowing the fourth and fifth that well. The fifth is pretty similar to the third. So again, if you have the Swole Grammar packet, that's on page 1 and also on page 2, a little more on page 2. Okay, so number 1, the man giving the little book. Number 2, the men giving the little book. We made it plural. Number 3, the little book having been given by Catullus. Dono is basically the same as do, as he tells you in the book. Then number 4, Catullus about to give the little book to Cornelius. Cornelio is dative, so indirect object. Okay, so moving on to page 3. We'll probably just, this video, we'll probably just do the grammar and then maybe do the poem in a second one. We'll see. Okay, so he gives a little bit of information on the genitive. Genitive, I kind of compare sometimes with an adjective because you're telling a little bit of information about a particular noun, say. Like, okay, the Cornelius's book, the book belonging to Cornelius. It's not just any book on the shelf, it's Cornelius's book. Just like you might say the red book, okay? There are some kind of specialized uses, if you want to say, and he's going to give a couple of them here. There's A on page 3, genitive of price or value. So you can say, in his poem, he has, let us judge, estimemus, that's a subjunctive, but we'll talk about that later. Or he says, let's reckon. The rumores, and then omnes rumores, all the rumors of these rather severe, severiorum senum, rather fierce, rather severe old men. Okay. And then here's your genitive. Literally, let us value it of 1 penny, or an as was a really small coin, so we just translate it as penny. So as he says, let's reckon or let's judge all the rumors, omnes rumores, of the too severe or rather severe, rather fierce old men, senum severiorum, literally of 1 penny, or as worth 1 penny. And so that's the genitive of price or genitive of value. If you really love grammar, you can get a book. There are several of these old Latin grammars. I like, I can't believe that my Allen and Greeno, I've used that book 8 million times, and to think that I would forget Allen and Greeno. And for you Shakespeare fans, Kittredge did a little bit of editing on it, so it's maybe technically you'd say Allen, Greeno, and Kittredge. George Lyman Kittredge was a big Shakespeare scholar. And so I like, it's called the New Latin Grammar, even though it was published in about 1900, so that's kind of funny, a lesson not to call your book new. But it's good. But there are lots of them. A lot of people like Gildersleeve and Lodge. You could look up on Abe Books and find those probably used at a good deal. And with those, they'll have little sections on the genitive case, and they'll give you about 8 different uses. And usually, you usually don't need to know what to call something, but sometimes it's handy to kind of have a tag on these things, okay? And this is kind of funny here, genitive with special words. It's kind of like a last case scenario. One of my teachers used to jokingly refer to the ablative of last resort. And so here he gives an example. I would actually call this a partitive genitive. But anyway, whatever this, and thus applying is, whatever this is of a little book, okay? Now that's really weird in English, but, something like whatever this little book is, or this little book such as it is, as Ken says, okay? So that's some information to get you going. If you turn to page 4, he has vocabulary and notes going with the poem. And I think I'm not going to go through the poem on this video. I kind of like to keep these videos short since I know it's a little bit dull to watch a 30-minute one of these videos. So play with that. On page 5, he's given the poem in a slightly different word order just to make it a little bit easier, supplied a couple of words, and he has put in bold words that go together. So just a little hint, some hints there to help you if you haven't translated poetry before, because poetry in some ways is harder than prose because the word order tends to be more flexible. You have to fit a certain meter, and so, you know, it's a little bit allowable to move words further away than you normally would do in prose, okay? So that's what he's trying to help you with. I'll close with one last suggestion. I'll try to remember to give you a link on this for those taking the class. If you have trouble knowing what these forms are, there's a site from Tufts University, Tufts, I think that's in or near Boston, called Perseus. It's Perseus, like the hero, Perseus, perseus.tufts.edu. But it's a very, very common site. So you could just put in like Perseus Latin or Perseus Catullus or something like that. And I think it would take you, if you Google that, I think it would take you, give you the option to get onto the Perseus website. And they have tons and tons of authors. They will have Catullus, and you can click on a poem, and there's a way to click on a word that's fairly obvious. I can't remember exactly how it is now, but it's not hard. You click on it, and it will tell you the most likely grammatical form that this is. Now, the way they do it is by vote, because there's too much on there to have one person going through and figuring everything out. So they've done it by vote, people using the text. But it's correct, I'd say at least 98% of the time, maybe more than that, maybe close to 100. But sometimes it is wrong. I have found it wrong. But with something like Catullus, where 1 million people are using this, I don't think you'll find anything wrong, maybe 2 wrong words in the whole set or something. So you can click on that, and so they would say, like, libellum, they're going to say, okay, this is masculine, accusative, singular. Now, you don't want to get too much addicted to that, because you need to be able to look up words that are in charts and things. My friend told me not to hold this phone down like that, and I've been doing that the whole time, so there. How's that? And so, you know, don't use that as a crutch, but if you haven't done Latin for a long time and you need to do that, do that. But remember to take little chunks all the way of your grammar for review. So for instance, you know, we mentioned today the first 3 declensions. So go back and review those, you know, look them up, write them out a couple of times, try to memorize them. Because there's certain things in Latin that you want to have really thoroughly down, you know, memorized. I was thinking back in math, you know, you had the quadratic equation. You used it probably every day in geometry. So you don't want to have to look up the quadratic equation every time. Now with that one, it's so easy, you probably would not have to make an effort to memorize it, because you see it 10 times and then you learn it. So it's maybe not always important to memorize, but I do think sometimes memorization will help. Oh wait, that's Pythagorean theorem, wasn't it? The quadratic equation is the a squared plus b squared. That one I did have to memorize, because it's a little more complicated. Sorry, I got that wrong, but you probably catch the point. Okay, well, I will quit on that, and I'll try to do a follow-up recording going through this poem 1. All right, bye.